Hello, welcome to PSR People Speaking Rail. I'm one of your hosts, Mike Baudendistel, joined as always by Joanna Marsh, who does editorial writing at FreightWaves. And I guess you were able to make it on. You were having some technical difficulties a minute ago, but there you are in
Yeah.
high definition. How are you today?
Yeah. So the world may know now. I use a cheap Chromebook, and the camera looked a little bit funny, and I'm like, I don't remember the camera looking like that. And then I tried to use it just now, and all I saw was red. So I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, well, I guess that's that. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to use my phone from now on for these things, or if it's an excuse to get another laptop, if not a Chromebook, or get a webcam. I don't know. So we'll see. I'm actually kind of old school, and I suppose I should get all the fancy gadgets, right? Like the webcam and the microphone and all of that. But I don't know. I'm not committing to
They
anything.
do make a difference. I guess the other point that some people have is you should really do podcasts in your closet because this clothes absorb the noise. But then it's like, well, I have everything else in front of my desk, and I'll just have to, But if you ever really want to have a professional podcast, go in your closet. is what I've
Yeah.
heard. It sounds the best there. So you've
Yeah.
been
No.
so I guess before your computer crashed, you were put out a lot of articles here, a lot on railroad safety, which has been a big topic here. And that's just one of them. There's just one on the FRA and OSHA calling on Norfolk Southern to review safety practices. You also wrote about one that was really unfortunate on CSX. A couple of conductors died. What can you tell us about those articles?
Yeah. So um, I don't know. I mean, I don't think it was coordinated unless you think it's a government conspiracy. But yesterday, the Federal Railroad Administration and the Occupational Safety, OSHA, I'm sorry, Safety and Health, or I don't know. Oh my gosh, something live TV. I don't remember what OSHA stands for, but I know it's Occupational Safety and Health. So there you go. They separately released reports or findings related to what they had learned about from studying the causes and sort of the conditions related to the February 3rd derailment of the Norfolk Southern train in East Palestine, Ohio. So I think OSHA's came out first. They both came out in the afternoon. OSHA's came out first, and it was saying that the the agency, Norfolk Southern, and the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way, so the union representing maintenance of way employees, which is affiliated with the Teamsters. They had all reached a settlement agreement on some citations that OSHA found from from not causes, but from how Norfolk Southern responded to the derailment. So
Mhm.
so the union had alerted OSHA, or had contacted OSHA earlier this spring, saying that it felt that some members felt that they weren't being protected in the way that they should have been protected in responding to the derailment, which also included the I can't think of the word right now, but it's there were several hazardous tank car. There were several tank cars carrying hazardous materials, and they had to do a planned venting of the vinyl chloride cars out of concern that that the chemical reaction would cause an explosion. It seemed that just the decision at the time, and so because of the hazmat materials involved, um, some union maintenance of way members had felt that uh, that their health had been, or their safety had been jeopardized. And so OSHA investigated Norfolk Southern, an environmental consultancy firm involved in the cleanup, as well as two other companies involved in the cleanup. And OSHA cited Norfolk Southern for several, I think four instances in particular. And then one of the other companies involved in the cleanup was also cited. So Norfolk Southern will pay the penalties, which I think is over 40,000, providing that. And I guess the settlement agreement goes back to, I think, sort of everyone kind of coming to a consensus about what the citations were. So you have that, and then later in the day, the Federal Railroad Administration released its assessment of Norfolk Southern safety culture, and it was kind of mixed in the sense that that there were some things that Norfolk Southern they thought was good at, or was working well towards. And then there were some other things, kind of they pointed to four general areas where they felt that Norfolk Southern could improve. And of course, Norfolk Southern said, we'll work on this stuff. The other interesting kind of stepping back is that, so this is the first assessment of FRA's safety culture kind of assessment that it said it would plan to do. After Norfolk Southern, it said later on, I think in June, that they were actually going to conduct assessments of the safety cultures of all the other Class 1 railroads. So Norfolk Southern's here, the first one, but then you're also probably going, you're going to see the other ones come out as well. So individual reports for each railroad, and then another sort of wider report looking at the industry at large. So that'll be interesting to see, what commonalities, if any, or just how each individual railroad performs, or what FRA finds in all of them. So.
It is hard to assess culture because it's not something that seems objective to me. Like some people might think a certain corporate environment is toxic, and other people say, well, this is just how business is done, or this is fine, or it's not any worse than other places I've been, and those things. And just different people could have very different experiences. Some people might say, well, the training on safety was just fine. Other people might say, well, we were only given 30 seconds to evaluate a rail car. I mean, you're talking about Class 1 railroads of tens of thousands of people. It might have a good safety culture in some areas and not in others, in some terminals, not in others. So all those things I think is a little bit hard to assess. The other thing that stands out about that discussion with the OSHA is that the workers that were on the train, the locomotive engineer and the conductor that were on that infamous train, February 3rd, it was clear from what both the railroad said and from government regulators that those employees did nothing wrong. And so it's these MOW workers, those would be the ones responsible for maintaining the maintenance of way. And there's been a lot of discussion of whether or not the detectors, those hot box detectors, were installed properly, maintained properly. If that was a mechanical failure, was that something? So I think that's maybe why that union specifically wanted to come out and defend its workers there. So it's still, I think, a lot of stories you're going to be writing. It sounds like in the coming weeks, coming months, about railroad safety as well.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too, because there have been some reports recently, kind of looking at. It's been the 6-month anniversary of East Palestine, and what's the status of the rail safety bill? And right now, it's still awaiting a greater hearing in the Senate floor. Of course, the committee passed it, but then it's still waiting for a vote and just for debate on the floor. And so, there's questions. But will it actually reach the floor or not? is it that going to happen in September, or that kind of thing. And then of course you also have the House of Representatives with what's the likelihood of some sort of rail safety bill getting through the House of Representatives. So there's still actually
Mhm.
quite a bit to go through.
Mhm.
And those who have been advocating for this current rail safety bill in its present iteration, I think they're a little concerned that uh, that progress has stalled. I don't know if
Mhm.
it was, of course, interesting, earlier on with the accident still kind of fresh in everyone's minds, sort of the rail industry kind of being careful about like what, what how they approach rail safety, and that they're and that there are actually a number of provisions in the bill that the rail industry and shippers have kind of had a hand in, which some people say good, some people say it depends on whose side you're on, but 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 it is, I guess you could argue, sort of a more informed bill than perhaps its initial iteration. But then again, who knows what's going to happen with the bill period. So
Yeah, we'll watch that story closely for sure. Want to move on to another story that you wrote. It's on BNSF's Sandpoint Junction project is finally completed. Have some art on that as well. Good looking bridge there. Looks like a beautiful part of the country there in Idaho. I've not been out there to see that, but I read this article, also that you wrote, and I guess what struck me is that it was proposed back in 2017. They got the permitting done in 2018, and here we are now, 2023, and it's finally done. Why does it take so long to get a bridge built? Was there anything? Is that typical? Do you have an idea, or is there something about this that just caused it to take longer?
yeah, I'm not really sure. I I would think, the of course the actual construction and engineering of it, you can see it. It is a beautiful scene, and just you kind of wonder like how you would build a second, not being an engineer, like how you would build a second bridge across that lake, which has quite a span from one shoreline to another. I would think I think a lot of projects face, I don't want to say necessarily face local opposition, but I think there's always I don't know. I think there's uh, a challenge or an opportunity um, when kind of approaching local communities about what benefits this project might have. So I don't know if this is something that's been kind of,
Mm.
when they say that, when BNSF said this has been kind of more than a decade in the making, is it more sort of like this sort of was first planned in 2013, and then it took a while to get the permitting for momentum forward, trying to ensure that the state agency would pass the permits, so it's um, in which case I could see that taking 3 or 4 years. But then again, I'm just kind of talking just in general terms. But yeah, I think like you said, it is actually a really beautiful scene. I kind of like personally like, oh, can I kind of keep this picture for myself? It's kind of really pretty, but but I think that I think the bridge actually serves passenger rail as well, because Amtrak
Mm.
shares that, so it'll
Okay.
be pretty to cross it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
it is easy to see when you look at that picture just how that would reduce congestion, because it looks like there's one line going on the one side, and that actually that part on the left looks like it might be passenger rail. Certainly on that side on the right looks like freight rail. So that's might be part of the reason that got passed. But certainly can understand how that would alleviate congestion sort of in the communities, which you would think that would be an easy one to get passed. But anyway, want to move
yeah.
on to the next story, unless you have another thought there.
Oh, no, 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 no. That's it. I think when BNSF was also talking about congestion, they were also referring to the trains having to wait in the local communities, so then you have the opportunity for block crossings, that kind of thing, before they can
Mhm.
cross. So that was also the other factor, I think. In So the area congestion, in terms of like, at least we won't have to have these trains idle for as long as they have been idling.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yes, let's move on.
Okay, let's move on. So the next one, he also another article. This was 2 days ago, August 8th. I did a report. He wrote up a report. Data should be driven by data should drive the debate on freight train length. So there's a debate on the freight train lengths. We've seen this a lot, where the trains are getting longer. That's more efficient. A lot of times they're using distributed power, basically locomotives in the middle of the consist, to reduce those in-train forces. Easy to see why that's more efficient use of crews, more efficient use of fuel to have longer trains, potentially more efficient use of the assets on the ground. And I guess the counter argument is that sometimes maybe the passing sidings are not as long as they need to be to accommodate trains that are upwards of, let's say, 2,000 foot plus in length. And there have been times when it's caused basically children to have a hard time getting to school on time. Just first responders in some cases haven't been able to get to where they need to be, and that just causes congestion in communities. Is that the extent of the pushback there, or is there more to it than that?
I think that's a lot of it. I think that there's another element that I don't think the report touched on as much, although I'd have to review the report again to confirm that. But one question that some crews have had is, like, if you do have longer, heavier trains running on track, like, how does that affect the physical track itself, like, over time? It's even similar, like on the highway. If you have these really big trucks, like, how does that affect the road over time? And so, like, for instance, actually, I think that's like last week there was something involving. It was the NTSB's sort of report on the Amtrak derailment, and that happened in September 2021 in, I think, Montana, and they were kind of talking about how the track was worn down. And I'm not. It's not to say that longer, heavier trains were running on that track, but I think that sort of illustrates that question of, like, what effect does longer, heavier trains have on track, and if you do decide to pursue longer trains still, we have the maintenance sort of ready to ensure that track stays healthy and and doesn't wear out as quickly as otherwise. But so I think that's one other factor. In looking at
and you also got a comment. Sometimes the comments on our articles are just complete nonsense. But in this particular case, someone commented who seems to have a pretty informed view. Guy who says organizer Railroad Workers United, and he says the workers don't like that. They say a lot of times when the trains are too long, it's hard to fit it between the various road crossings. It's sort of similar to what I was saying before about not maybe the passing sidings aren't long enough. In a lot of cases, those sidings need to be extended. And I think I said 2,000 feet earlier. I think I meant more like 10,000 feet. Call it 2 mile long trains. So I want to correct myself there. But that's another perspective that I thought was an interesting comment from the workers. Want to move on to this is kind of more of a fun one, but we do infographics from time to time, and we have an infographic on 5 surprising railroad jobs. And our heading is blocking one of them, so I'll read these. Fuel master. A fuel master is trained in driving techniques. So that's similar to the leader program, or just how to drive a locomotive to maximize fuel efficiency. Simulations developer, who is involved in teaching employees how to maneuver locomotives. Police officer. Beer conductor, I guess, make sure that the beer doesn't freeze in Chicago. And avalanche control. So out of those 5, I think the one that I knew about certainly was police officer. I knew the railroads had their own police force to enforce any trespassing on their track. They own that track. It was gifted to them by the federal government. So I knew about that. Avalanche control, that makes sense. I've heard a lot about avalanches from following Canadian Pacific, over the years. They, go through the Canadian Rockies. That's an issue for them. So certainly, that's something that can really impair their operations. And mainline, I guess the one that was most surprising to me was beer conductor. Do you have any thoughts on any of these job titles, or any other job titles that you know of that are a little out there in the railroad world?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I read a story actually about the railway police. Like I think that got published in late June or early July, so you can check that out. But you know, I have a son who's 10, and he loves playing like train simulators on Roblox. He's actually more into subways than passenger freight than freight rail, but anyway. So I was kind of drawn to the simulations developer job actually. So like, okay, let's see how we can parlay your video game playing into a career. No, not that I'm like a tiger mom or anything, but no. So yeah, so that kind of struck me. But yeah, the beer conductor was kind of interesting as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and they cited Cinco de Mayo, which makes sense because there's a lot of beer that gets moved from Mexico in boxcars, and yeah, I mean, I guess it still can be cold, kind of late in the spring. It goes far enough north. So I thought that was interesting. I think my all-time favorite railroad title is maybe hump master, which a hump master is whoever's in charge of the hump yard. If it's not a hump yard, it would be a train master, but that would be one that would probably require some explanation if you told people what you did for a living. And as I say, I'm a hump master. We have about 4 minutes left. I'm going to go through a few sonar charts quickly, spend maybe a minute on each. This first one is outbound tender, not about tender, outbound domestic container volume. So these are 53-foot containers that have been loaded. These are year-over-year charts. The white line is 2023, and it's now down in this latest data point about 1.3% year over year, and the third quarter kind of quarter to date roughly in line with the second quarter. Now, you do have to sort of consider that the 4th of July holiday, more significant holiday for freight than Memorial Day in the second quarter. But in any event, kind of not seeing a tremendous amount of seasonal pickup. What is notable is the comps versus a year ago getting easier. You did have last year the domestic intermodal volume, in addition to international intermodal volume, really show weakness in the second half of the year. So another point I'd make here is that this volume trend is holding up better than the volume that you see on a weekly basis from the Association of American Railroads. The AAR data conflates domestic intermodal and international intermodal. Just looked at that. It was published on Wednesday. It's showing U.S. containers down 3.6% year over year in the last week, down 4.9% in the past 4 weeks. And here we have, just looking at domestic loaded containers, 53-foot loaded containers down 1.3%. This chart now is looking at intermodal spot rates. This is an average of 100 lanes. And so, you really, sometimes when you get to this time of the year, these start to tick up like they did in 2020 in orange, went up very significantly in the third quarter in 2020. Also did a similar pattern in 2021. Those spot rates, increased, and that's because the carriers will increase spot rates in order to protect capacity for the contracted shippers. And really did not happen last year in 2022. You see that blue line, sort of reflected that intermodal volume was weak in the second half of last year. You saw spot rates fall throughout the year, and really they've been weak all year and are still weak. But you see that latest data point there, then that white line ticked up ever so slightly in August. And so it really kind of reflects what we heard last week from Run Rail, which we asked them what the company that owns a certain number of containers, small but growing domestic intermodal company, whether they think they're going to have a peak season for intermodal. And Chris Jocelyn said, who's the president, said maybe more of a speed bump. And so maybe with intermodal spot rates ticking up ever so slightly, let's call it 6 or 8 weeks ahead of when you typically think of the intermodal peak season, maybe that's something that's likely to happen. This latest last chart here intermodal contract rates. These are an average of intermodal contract rates. These exclude fuel surcharges. And in white line, again, is 2023. Those have been on a downward trajectory, all year as these contracts get repriced, but it does seem like they're maybe have stabilized because most of the intermodal volume has been repriced in the current loose freight condition. So that's a little bit of a quick overview of what's happening in Sonar on the intermodal side. And that's really, I think, what we wanted to go over today. And how can people find the FreightWaves Railroad newsletter?
Yeah, so I think at each of my articles, towards the bottom, there's a link that will let you subscribe to the Rail newsletter and all the other newsletters that we have here on FreightWaves. So check it out.
Yeah, go ahead and do that, and see everyone next week.